Photographic Composition, Lecture 12, Portfolio, Part 1. Until now, we've been focused on specific aspects and specialties within photography, but now we're down to the final presentation of your work. Up until the last 15 years or so, virtually all photography was either presented in book or magazine or portfolio form or hung on walls. Although those means of reaching an audience still exist, they've changed considerably with the advent of the internet. We'll get to that shortly. In the meantime, I wanted to address some basic ideas about how images have been put together for presentation. When Walker Evans was asked in 1938 to put together an exhibition of his work at the then new Museum of Modern Art, it was decided that a book would also be produced as a catalog. As a result, we still have available to us through a number of printings evidence of what that show consisted of and how it was structured. Evans was very well aware of the importance of a book to understand what his work was about, and the task of sequencing the images was something he took seriously. I've deliberately preserved the order of the first 10 images in the book. First image is of a common and pretty rundown commercial photography studio in New York, a tacit acknowledgement of the importance in everyday life the medium had attained by 1934 when the image was made. Next is one of Evans' most famous images, Penny Picture Display, Savannah, 1936, which features a catalog of American faces, both specific and anonymous. Here he's moved in for a closer look of the impact of photography. Although many people owned or had access to cameras by this time, the only place to have a fine photograph made of oneself or loved ones was at a professional studio. Evans follows that with one of his own images of working class people somewhere in Pennsylvania. Is it a coincidence that the background is filled with anonymous, out-of-focus people? And that's followed by another window display, this time featuring a poster of President Herbert Hoover, a small floral bouquet, and off-kilter papers. We then move on to a New Orleans barbershop with a smiling woman wearing a cobweb-decorated blouse amid some pretty crazy stripes, clearly hand-painted. And from there we move into a barbershop interior, which is no less visually complicated. This is an auto graveyard located in Pennsylvania Field, which is followed by a detail of a handmade sign announcing gas. Signs, and particularly those made by hand, would figure large in Evans's work throughout his career. Here we see an elaborately painted scene showing a couple enjoying sandwiches in and on their car by a lake or the ocean. This is followed by a portrait of a couple sitting in their car in a small town. Note the truck speeding through the background. As you can see, there is little that is random about Evans' sequencing in these first 10 images for what has become a landmark book. If you have an opportunity to see it, you'll discover that the same level of thought has been given to the order in which all 76 of the images have been presented. Although it was originally shunned and reviled by the public and critics when it came out in 1959, Robert Frank's The Americans has become no less iconic or important than American photographs in the history of photography. In the mold of Evans, Frank took great care in assembling his images. The connections from one to the next may not be as apparent as Evans' images were, but then Frank's sensibility is different. Like the artists, musicians, poets, and filmmakers that he counted as friends, his work can be seen as presenting overarching themes which dominated his political and social sensibilities in the 1950s. The Americans expresses the point of view of a Swiss immigrant encountering the U.S. during his first years in the country. And the flag motif is something that we see throughout the book and throughout Frank's work in general. Also, here we get to see this theme of anonymity as well. While we see that there are people, one is obscured by the flag and another is obscured in shadow. So we see them, but then we don't really see them. On the other hand, we see an image like this one, which is taken at a political rally with men who were still wearing top hats. This is in the mid-1950s. And these were people of serious power in their day. Another politician. Here, interestingly, contrasted against a figure. He's standing on a ledge somewhere, and with this figure, architectural figure in the lower part of the frame. And now in a completely different context, we have a funeral in the South with all black men and cars, and looks like a hearse. Cars and concerns about race play a very important part in the Americans. And this is a very different group of people at a rodeo. It's not just by accident that we see these contrasting images in Frank's work. Here we see a fairly typical looking couple crossing a street somewhere in the South. And here we're back to the flag motif with somebody's feet up on a desk. And compositionally, this is a really interesting image to me, that we don't actually see the person in the space, but we have a sense of who he might be if we were to actually see him. We wouldn't know the specifics of his face, perhaps, but we would certainly have an idea of how he comported himself because of the way we see his shoes in this shot. And this is taken on a train, I believe the Washington to New York shuttle, which was favored at the time by politicians in particular. This was taken in Hollywood, and starlet at a theater at an opening for a film. And here in New York, a group of kids sitting around a jukebox. So as you can see, Robert Frank was very interested in a wide range of subject matter and people, which all contribute to his larger body of work and have a consistency to them. Lee Friedlander has published countless books and been just as concerned with how they're presented as Evans and Frank. Since his work is presented in many places around the internet, over which he has little or no control, it's subject to presentations that are haphazard at best. This is a series put together by the very well-regarded Fraenkel Gallery in San Francisco, excuse me, which has represented him well for a long time. The images have lost none of their individual power. However, there has been little attention paid to which comes first, how they relate to each other, and how the group ends. Ultimately, this relies on the viewer's prior understanding of Friedlander's work to put these in context. They've lost the power of cogent presentation in the process. And again, we get to see the themes that run through all of Friedlander's work, but while there may be some evidence going from one image to another that there's something similar going on, it's not consistent. The images also go back and forth in time. This was taken in the 70s. The prior image is from early in the 21st century. And then in the middle, we have a photograph of Aretha Franklin. Friedlander had been a commercial photographer who photographed primarily jazz musicians, blues and soul singers. And so this was not unusual for him, but this image was taken with the intention of it going on an album cover or a 45 RPM cover, and not to be sold in a gallery, but here it is, and it just sort of comes out of nowhere. Friedlander has been shooting mostly, or I should say exclusively, with 2¼ square cameras for the last couple of decades, and counts among his subject matter, which is vast, flowers and floral images like this. But he also photographs people. This is from a series that he did on working people, also made in the late 1970s, early 80s. And then there's also just wherever he happens to be, he's got his camera and he's going to make images. Sometimes tackling very subjects that have become kind of cliches, but always doing them with his own point of view intact. This group of images, which I'm about to show you, Broken Manual, is taken from a series featured on Alex Soth's website. I know how to pronounce his name because he actually tells you on the website that it's Soth. It rhymes with both. Soth is also very concerned with presentation and sequencing in his images, but is utilizing tools that are only readily available online. For instance, the images are in this particular group and throughout his website are laid out from left to right, with only 2 at a time being visible and accessible by swiping. This first image proclaims his conceptual bent by placing a book titled Broken Image within the cutout section of a larger image, excuse me, with the cutout section of a larger book. The next image is of an installation of the series in a gallery. And what he's letting us know is that while you're seeing this online, it's something that has also been produced to be seen within the context of a gallery. And from there, he includes images from the series. And in each case, they're not necessarily diptychs, because when you actually go to the website, you can scroll through the series. And what I've done is merely chosen the pairs of images because that's how they lay out on the screen. And here we have what appears to be a cave or some kind of opening in stone, and a portrait. And again, there isn't necessarily, he's closer to Robert Frank in his selection of images. But because he is certainly a thoughtful photographer, it's clear that these have been sequenced with something in mind. It's not always clear to me, but it's clear that somebody has been thinking about this process. And here we go to 2 images of seemingly very disparate subject matter that appear to have been shot on a seamless, or at least a blank, relatively white field. And very much abandoned and looks like burned out bus next to a very soft image of looks like a man in a field of snow seen under barbed wire. And he also goes from black and white to color and color to black and white. Here we see an interior and with a lot of stuff in it, and a man in a field. Man's almost invisible because of the color of his outfit, and the back end of a truck, it looks like, open behind him. And we get a disco ball in a black and white image in the woods, and a man resting his head on looks like a moss-covered rock. Here we have another cutout, actually group of books, and some looks like an insect or something in a petri dish. And another man kind of a portrait, and then a much wider portrait in which we can't see the man's face to the right.